United Against Nuclear Iran Senior Advisor, Dr. Hiva Wallace, and United Against Nuclear Iran Policy Director, Jason Brodsky. Joint moderator, Matt Schlapp.
Hiva and Jason, we're here to talk about a serious subject, and that is this very clear Trump policy that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon. And the people in this room understand that Iran isn't just this rogue regime in the Middle East, but it's a regime that fuels terror and chaos all over the world, including in the Western Hemisphere, including allying itself with terrible regimes like in Venezuela. So the very first thing people should know about you, Hiva, is not only the work you both do to make sure that there's a maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Hopefully freedom will reign again in Iran soon, but you are Iranian. And so how do you think about President Trump having the courage to do the strike?
Thank you, Matt. I think President Trump has been the first president in a very long time that has understood how to deal with the Iranian regime. And after such a long time, he has restored Americans' deterrence in the region and in the world, actually, in fact. And Iranian people, for the most part, are thankful that his flawless military action, destroyed Iran's nuclear capability.
Yeah, for sure. So step in on that, Jason. So there's all this talk, propaganda from bad media outlets like CNN.
That's
Boo.
true.
You're allowed to boo.
You know, Matt, you said
I know you.
I'm from Iran, and I watched IRB because that was the only thing we had to watch. But it really scares me when we were watching, the news channel here, CNN and others, that for a minute you think you're watching IRIB when they're covering the way they were covering the attacks, immediately using the leaked low confidence report of there was barely any damage to Iran's nuclear capability, which is exactly what the Iranian regime wanted us to believe, wanted the Iranian people to believe. There's no room for that sort of reporting in our media when there was such an excellent job done by our commander-in-chief and our military forces. And then you have CNN reporter in Iran today reporting on the funeral of these 30 so commanders that were successfully, in a very precise target attack, killed by the Israeli forces, and reporting on the support of the regime.
So this will come as a shock to nobody in this room. Most of you or your families have fled these communist regimes that control the media immediately. And I'm sure it's sad for everyone to realize that same tactic is being used in America, but put a finer point on that. The information we're hearing out of Iran, what can we believe? What can't we believe?
Well, it's great to be with CPAC. I think that, sadly, American media, when you go into a totalitarian regime that controls all aspects of life in the Islamic Republic, you see the regime using Western media as an influence operation where they restrict the access that these media outlets have to the country, and they're only projecting onto television screens around the world the narrative that the Islamic Republic wants everyone to believe. And that is that the Islamic Republic still stands and that there's a rally around the flag effect where Iranians are outraged and chanting death to America. But the reality is very different because the majority of Iranians want the Islamic Republic gone. And unfortunately, what you see
it's not really a majority, right? It's like a super majority of like the non-crazy zealous religious parts of society, which would be like 90% of Iran.
Right, exactly. The regime still has a very small but hardened core base, but the vast majority of Iran wants the Islamic Republic gone.
And so if everybody wants them gone, how are they still there?
The Ayatollah, I think, has perfected a survival game. He has been in his chair since 1989, from President George H.W. Bush on, and he has learned how to survive American presidents, but there's only been one American president, really, who has made him sweat, and that's President Trump. There's a reason why the Islamic Republic was trying to kill President Trump before he took office. And that's because President Trump knows how the Ayatollah thinks and understands his psychology, and he has been more risk-ready than any of his predecessors in order to pressure the Islamic regime.
He definitely has built this whole regime around his personality. So there is that 8-9% that are radicalized supporter, young supporter of him. It is around 1%.
He's that dynamic of a person? He doesn't seem dynamic. He seems
Definitely
old
not
and-
anymore. He's hiding and he's frail and sick, but definitely not anymore.
Okay, so let's turn to CNN a little more detailed. So they get a leaked report about how effective or ineffective President Trump's strikes were. And the rest of the U.S. media, I think my mic is cutting out. You mind if we... The rest of the U.S. media jumps on this idea, oh, typical of Trump, big talk, big bombs, had a little effect. That's a lie, right, Jason? That's a lie.
It's an absolute lie. First of all, the battle damage assessment hasn't even been concluded yet. So this DIA report was made with low confidence, and
what does DIA mean?
The Defense Intelligence Agency, which is only one agency of as a part of the large U.S. intelligence community. And there has been significant debate and disagreement within the intelligence community as to the findings of that report.
There's so much more different types of intelligence that goes into creating a report, and I don't believe this report was comprehensive at that level. There's signal intelligence, human intelligence, and particularly in situation like this, you need people on the ground to really verify. So it was way, way too early, and it was not a comprehensive report, besides the fact that it was low confidence.
So no shock, you should not be believing what you hear on CNN. Don't believe what you're reading in the New York Times. Does anybody watch CNN or read the New York Times here? I love coming back to Miami. This is fantastic. Although I don't really like the Miami Herald either. Am I right about that? I don't really like what I read there either. So it's hard to find out what's going on, which is why organizations like UANI, which you both work for, United Against a Nuclear Iran, CPAC, you really have to go to first sources to figure out what's going on. And the other thing you're not being told is even conservatives have had this big debate about what is regime change, what isn't regime change. And I think I always view regime change as a euphemism for basically assassination, usually. And it's got a very spotty history. So I understand why people are like, I don't know if we want to get involved with American troops and trying to select the next leader of a country. That being said, America should always be the ally of freedom when people in their own country want to stand up and take over from an autocratic leader, a despot, a regime. And I think what we're losing track of in that conversation is the horrors that Iran finances and funds. You were saying backstage that this supreme leader in Iran is basically the head of Al-Qaeda. Is that right?
Not many Americans realize this, but the de facto leader of Al-Qaeda currently resides in Iran. Iran provides safe harbor for senior Al-Qaeda leaders. And it is the leading state sponsor of terrorism for a reason. Ayatollah Khamenei, who's the supreme leader, has presided over a country and a regime that has been killing Americans since its inception. And the latest attack was really an attempt to settle accounts. And this was long overdue.
And in this crowd, Hiva, this is true, cooperating with the terrible dictator in Cuba, the terrible dictator in Venezuela. I love how these dictators have elections. I don't, we say Islamic Republic or Iranian Republic. It's like these are all, we have to be careful because there's not real elections in these places.
Many Iranians call the elections selections.
Selections, that's exactly right. But the Iran regime is trying to destabilize and partner with the worst people throughout Latin America too.
Absolutely, and even in U.S., Iran has sleeper cells. You know, just a few days ago,
Well,
11.
we can thank Joe Biden for the sleeper cells and the open
Absolutely,
border.
exactly. The policies led to that. 11 people were arrested, and from that, 2 people were known to have connections or have worked with IRGC or supported Hezbollah. And Khamenei has for a very long time worked to create these institutions or these sleeper cells within Western countries in order to be able to operationalize them at the time that he needs to. So their influence runs across the region. So they're not only a threat to the region, they're a threat to global security.
So most Americans I talk to support the bombing, support taking out the nuclear program, and they all ask the next question: what's going to happen next? So Jason, amidst this whole conservative conversation about whether President Trump is for regime change or isn't, I think he's made it very clear that he's not for it, but he wants to keep the mullahs guessing. Like we said at CPAC, the MAGA mullah meltdown. He likes the MAGA mullah meltdown. The mullah's uncertain, what will Trump do?
Yeah, I think President Trump's unpredictability has been a strategic asset for the United States. When he came into office, the Supreme Leader and his officials thought that they could lure the United States into the same Iran nuclear deal that President Trump rightfully withdrew from in 2018. But under President Trump's second term, the Ayatollah has learned the hard way that a deadline is a deadline, and this president has his own principles, and they will have to agree to his terms, otherwise there won't be any deal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Let's shift topics as we get started today. This whole question of anti-Semitism, which is basically funded and pushed by radical Islamic terrorists and leaders around the globe. We've sadly seen this hit our shores. I guess we might have considered this a Jewish question, right? And when we see Columbia and our other major universities seem to be formalizing this idea that the good people live in Gaza and the nasty people live in Israel, and it's kind of become hip in vogue to trash Jews, to trash Israel. At some point, we all have to wake up. Most of us in this room are probably Christians and Jews. At some point, we have to wake up and realize the people persecuting both communities are being funded by the people out of Iran. It's having a devastating impact in our society. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the Iranian regime is the leading state sponsor of anti-Semitism, and that's a designation that has been well earned. I think if you look at some warnings from the U.S. intelligence community, they have disclosed that the Iranian regime is trying to pay individuals in the United States to formulate anti-Semitic attacks against Jewish Americans and other communities around the world. And that's very dangerous because what starts with the Jewish community doesn't end with the Jewish community.
And we know in some of the, several months ago in some of these demonstrations in colleges, we know that the IRGC's people were involved and they were paid, some participants were paid to participate in these demonstrations that were for college students that were doing the demonstration, but there were these older crowds that would participate, and they're known to have ties to the IRGC as well. And, the identity of this regime, the core existence of this regime is based on hating Israel and destruction of Israel and actually the West.
But the most positive takeaway, Hiva, is to know that the people of Iran, 90% or so, would be appalled to be associated with these policies.
Iran, as we mentioned before, Iran has the largest Jewish population in the Middle East, in the region. And there's a lot of
outside Israel.
Outside of Israel, that's true. There's a lot of Iranian Jews, and they're all supportive of the strikes and they all want this regime gone, and majority of Iranians.
So Hiva's husband runs united against a nuclear Iran. And I've known him a very long time, Ambassador Mark Wallace. And he said you're Iranian American. You're an American. Come on, are you a citizen? You're legit. You went the whole way. That's good. So he's like, I'm marrying this Iranian woman, and I didn't know what her
Muslim.
Yeah, who's Muslim, and I was like, I don't know what her politics are going to be. This could be bad. She could be dragging Mark to the left, but your experience with Iranians in America is they're MAGA.
Absolutely. No, my mom is.
I met your mother.
Yes, you have. And no, they're very supportive of President Trump. Iranians were excited when he's the only president that has stood up to Iran, even in his first term, when he was the first president to get rid of Qasem Soleimani, who was responsible for death of many Americans in the region and in across the world. So Iranians were big supporters of President Trump and MAGA for sure.
So one of the themes today is this coalition. Maybe most of you are Republicans. I don't know. Maybe you're not. I've met some Democrats today already. That really doesn't matter at a CPAC. What matters at a CPAC is, we're going to listen to each other, respect each other, and figure out what our commonality is. And one of the things that this Pew Research project demonstrated, you guys might have all read about it the other day, is people who come from minority communities are flocking to the Republican Party or to Donald Trump or to America First policies. Whatever this movement is properly called, it has different names. What is constantly the biggest theme of it is it's not so much about people that have my background or look like me, it's people that come from other populations. The best part of that is that it destroys this idea that Republicans or conservatives or people who love America, that we're racist, that we hate people who are different, when of course we all knew this all the way along, that nothing could be further from the truth. It's exactly the exact opposite. Jason, why don't you conclude our conversation today by giving the audience just a glimpse into what the next step. The bombing occurs, CNN and other media outlets say, oh, it wasn't effective. We know it was effective. We don't know how effective yet because it's too soon. What's going to happen, you think, over the next weeks?
Well, I think it's going to be very important to keep the foot on the gas for the President Trump's maximum pressure campaign, which is aimed at tightening the economic noose around the regime, because if we continue to enforce sanctions, that's going to deprive the regime of rebuilding its nuclear program, rebuilding its military, and also rebuilding its terrorist infrastructure. So it's a national security imperative of the United States for that to continue and to see the regime weakened. And I think President Trump has demonstrated that the United States can undertake targeted surgical military strikes without starting a war. And that's very important.
Will this terrorist dominated regime in power a year from now?
That's a very hard prediction, Matt. I think that the long-term trends should suggest that the Islamic Republic is not long for this world. The drivers that have brought the Iranian people into the streets over the last several years continue economically, socially, politically, and this regime is living on borrowed time.
Hiva, will they be around a year from now?
The Ayatollah is 86 years old. Either he's going to die from natural causes or not natural causes, but it definitely is happening soon. He's very fragile and paranoid, and he's looking around, worried. If there's a commander next to him that's still alive, why is he still alive? And so
you said he basically lives like an ant underground.
He does, and let him experience a little bit what those hostages they took out of Israel, the Hamas, those who he supported, how they felt. I mean, he's only been down there for like 14 days. Those people were down there for over a year.
And there's 50 still there, so
there's still 50 there. Let him experience that a little bit. I hope he stays down there because he knows that if they even for a second they think to reinstate their nuclear program or start their support for these terrorist organizations, President Trump has shown that he's not afraid to go back and hit their programs again.
Amen. Well, thank you both for all the work you do to highlight the treacherous nature of this regime in Iran, for helping build the maximum pressure campaign to help this most important foreign policy, efforts that it's successful, and for supporting President Trump in what was a very courageous bombing of the nuclear facilities. And we will all keep the people of Iran in our prayers. And we understand our true enemy is not the people, but this terrible regime. So thanks for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.